Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night, is once again your boy, Beatty, and I am back at the Horror Tavern. This is a completely different day, a completely different setting. No, this is not the same time period as the previous video, and no, I did not just turn around my hat to make it seem like this was a different day. Not at all. But welcome back to the Horror Tavern. I am a one-stop shop for horror. I talk about all things horror, whether it be episodes of shows, whether it be movies, whether it be books, anything you can name it. And today we're going to be revisiting kids horror. So once again, make sure you take a seat, grab a drink, get that nachos Lunchable with the Kit Kat inside, and then make sure you get a nice Capri Sun because we're going to be diving into Goosebumps. That's right. My channel started with Goosebumps, and even though I ventured out of things outside of Goosebumps, I always got to come back to the OGs. So today I'm going to be talking about actually an episode from the TV show, which I saw as a kid and I remember liking more as a kid, but now that I rewatch it as an adult, it's got some problems to it. But nonetheless, let's talk about it, and that is the Goosebumps episode, Attack of the Mutant. Now, Attack of the Mutant is a two-parter. This is, of course, a superhero, supervillain, comic book themed story. One of the most iconic Goosebumps stories of all time. And I have not read the book. I started reading the book. I'm only going to be basing it off the episode. And this episode to me as a kid was fun. You know, as a kid, you like some of the corny, cheesy stuff that's in there. You basically sort of tend to ignore some of the plot issues and some of the things involving characters that can be a problem. But nonetheless, as an adult, I notice more problems and critiques of it. And although I don't think it's the worst episode, I think it's still sort of in the middle in terms of Goosebumps episodes as a whole. I'm not as big a fan of it. I know some people shit on this episode. I know some people absolutely love this episode. It's one of their top ones. So either way you fall on the pendulum, that's fine. I'm just going to be honest with my thoughts about it, and I just want to talk about it. So Attack of the Mutant, for those of you who don't know, is about this kid named Skipper. And this kid named Skipper, he collects comic books. He's obsessed with comic books, and specifically he's obsessed with the comic book series called The Masked Mutant. And The Masked Mutant is like the world's greatest supervillain. He deals with like the League of Good Guys. The League of Good Guys. Yeah, Penn Stein is cooking up with that pen, right? The League of Good Guys. That's bullshit. That's a terrible title. But yeah, the Masked Mutant deals with this League of Good Guys, fake-ass Justice League. And Skipper is really in love with these comic books, but his dad is very much opposed to it. His dad cares about grades and stuff, even though his dad himself was not good at school, apparently. Can't teach people how to parent, right? So yeah, Skipper is in love with comic books. His dad and family sort of tries to look out for him, and he doesn't have any friends at school that are into it. But one day, as he has to take a bus down to like, I think an orthodontist appointment or something. I forgot why he took the bus in this episode. But as he's taking the city bus down to this, I guess, area, he ends up at a wrong stop. He misses his stop because this girl that he gets introduced to named Libby starts talking to him. She asks him if he's from Franklin School. She asks him what he's into. He's into comic books. She says she's into a comic book series, but he hates that comic book series. So, you know, he sort of starts ratting on her, and then he misses his stop. So he gets off at whatever stop he's able to. And when he gets off the bus, he sees all of a sudden this giant fire hydrant. It's like this neon pink colored fire hydrant in the middle of this like industrial center on the outskirts of town. It's like a bad part of the town area. And he then realizes as he looks at the comic book that this is actually the Masked Mutants lair. Yeah, that's right. The Masked Mutants headquarters and lair is actually in the real world for some reason now. And he freaks out, you know, he gets scared and he all of a sudden leaves, and then he tries to go tell people about it. You gotta believe me stuff. None of his friends believe him. His one friend at school doesn't believe him. Libby doesn't believe him. But when he gets back there one day, I don't know if Libby came. No, Libby came with him the second time. So Libby gets with him the second time to go there, and it's nothing there. It looks invisible. And then when him and Libby start walking towards basically this area where this headquarters used to be, and now it's disappeared, all of a sudden there's this invisibility curtain on it, and they walk through. And I may be missing some parts. Again, this episode keeps bouncing back and forth between the layer and not. So I think that he saw the layer. He went back, told people, he didn't believe it. He went back, it was gone. He left. He comes back another time, a third time, and him and Libby go into it. And they get into the lair, they start exploring it. They're really freaked out as to why it exists. And then eventually, when they leave again, now the masked mutant seems to be out in the real world. There's some hints that the comic book character is out there, and now Skipper is dealing with something where he starts seeing in comic book vision, he starts seeing his parents as like glimmering graphics of like painted images on a comic. He thinks he might be sick or something, and then the comic books that he's seeing are actually including him in them. Because when he went to the masked mutant's lair and they explored there, he found this empty room that had these pages, and these pages had him on there. And he realized, what is the masked mutant doing with pictures of me? And when he gets back to the real world, he sees that, oh, now I'm ending up in the comics. And it seems like he has to save one of the main leaders of the league, if I can speak. It's late, y'all. The League of Good Guys, called the Galloping Gazelle or something. And he then has to go and save him from the masked mutant's lair. And that's essentially the plot. If it sounds like I was all over the place, the episode is all over the place. This episode has a shitty structure. It's bouncing back and forth between the lair, going back home, going to school, the lair, going back home, going to school, the lair, going back home, going to school, the lair. That's an odd structure to the episode. It feels like you're constantly going back and forth, and it's very repetitive. And it's a two-parter. It's 40 plus minutes, so it's a longer episode, so you definitely feel that. The acting in this episode is quite weak. Skipper is fine at certain points. He plays his character fine enough, but there are some cringy lines in there. I think he went into the headquarters like fucking 5 times, and then on the 6th time or whatever time he's there, and he meets the Galloping Gazelle, and they have to figure a way to defeat the masked mutant and get out of there. He goes into the control room, and he's like, oh my god, so we're finally in the masked mutant's headquarters. What do you mean you're finally in the masked mutant's headquarters? You were in the fire hydrant like 5 times. What do you mean you just made it to the headquarters? No, that's the control room. The control room is not the headquarters. The headquarters is the entire building. That's just a bad piece of dialogue. There's some other stuff I'm probably missing. The worst actor/actress in this episode is Libby. Libby cannot act for shit. They'll literally be in a bad situation, and Libby will be like, oh my god, you believe in comic books? How corny are you? All right, robot. Like, the way she delivers lines is really bad. She'll be like, oh god, that's what you believe in? Okay. Hey, my name is Libby, blah, 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 blah. The way she delivers is like a robot. She's not a good actress. She does a really shit job doing acting, no offense, but I gotta say what it is. The dad is real, sort of weird. He's like very much like on the nose, hates comic books, all about studies. Get to work, son. But then he's bad in school, so he's a hypocrite. Okay. The mother's sympathetic. She does a good job acting. The friend that Skipper has collects rocks for some reason. I started reading the book, and in the book he collects stamps, which makes more sense. Those have utility. Those can, I guess, accumulate in value over time. Collecting rocks, dude. You could just collect rocks. And he acts like Skipper collecting comic books that are rare is like a big thing. Like, he doesn't understand it. But dude, you collect rocks. You were literally the last person on Earth to talk. Whatever. Adam West is in this episode. He plays the Galloping Gazelle, who I think is... I like Adam West. He does a good job acting. He's funny in this role. I think he's one of the best parts of this episode. But the Galloping Gazelle is a shit villain. I mean, he just, I guess, leaps, and then there's a point where I guess Skipper is relying on this superhero to save his butt, and then the Galloping Gazelle just abandons him, just leaves because he's like, I'm too old for this. I'm not built for this. I'm a bitch. And then he runs away. Okay. That seemed like the most useless plot point just to get Skipper back to the lair. So I'm like, okay, that led to nowhere. The masked mutant, I think, is more intimidating and threatening in the book. From what I've read like a little over 10% of the book. And in the very beginning, it explains the masked mutant's powers. It explains why he's able to shapeshift. He does some cool stuff in the comic books in the book, which makes him more threatening. In the episode, it's just like zoomed in faces of like the masked mutant laughing on the pages of a comic, and every time the masked mutant's on screen, he's just like, ha, I'm the most greatest supervillain on Earth, ha 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 ha, ooh, supervillain. That's what he's like. It's like the most like over the top Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Beetleborg as villain. Like, he has no real threat to him. His powers are not explained. He appears mainly in the episode as a chair. I mean, the Galloping Gazelle sits on a fucking chair of all things, and then the mass mutant literally turns from a chair back into the mutant. And I'm like, bro, you let a whole man sit on your schlock? Okay, buddy, pause. You let a man sit on your lap. Pause on that, bro. I don't care if you roll that way, but pause, bro. So he just let a whole man sit on his lap, and he appears as a chair. Just does some goofy things and like can turn his hand into snakes. Whatever. His powers aren't explained, and there's a really stupid plot point which involves the fact that Skipper's getting this comic book vision on him, where the mutant reveals how he managed to make Skipper into a certain thing, give him this comic book vision, and I'm like, okay, I'm following that. But there's a big question in this episode. How the hell did you enter the real world? There is no explanation as to why and how the mass mutant went from a comic book into the real world. It's completely ignored. It's not even hinted to. It's not even given any sort of explanation. And it's a big thing. You're wondering to yourself, why is the mass mutant alive? Why is he in the real world? And all of a sudden, something involving a character turning into a comic book is a plot point, and then that's explained. But then Stein and the producers don't want to explain the big thing, which is, how did you get out of the comic book? And the show producers and writers have taken liberties before, added layers to story, so they're capable of doing it. I don't know why in a two-parter they decided not to flesh it out. I don't know, but that's an unexplained plot point. That's a giant elephant in the room, which is like, okay, whatever. I don't know why the mass mutant's able to come out into the real world. And it's funny that this is a comic book story, but it sort of really just makes fun of comic books. And the mass mutant is not even in the episode until like the last, 20% or less of the episode. It's like the last 10% of the episode is the real mass mutant action. And it's like, dude, this is like what? Like a two-parter, and only like less than 20% is dedicated to the mass mutant. And he doesn't do anything. He doesn't have any powers. He's just in this giant Robbie Rodden lair, this Wiggles layer that he's, messing around in. And this episode has some horrible stuff involving the layer. There's some bad visual effects. It's very clear that the kids are running in green screen like twice. And yeah, it's just very goofy, very over the top. There's no real reason for it. There's no real explanation. And I like the over the top stuff as long as there is actual execution and stuff done. I just covered an over the top movie in my last video, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which, funny enough, the Killer Clowns from Outer Space layer, which came out before the mass mutant, that layer looks very similar to the mass mutant's layer. So they sort of got similar things, so you can kind of compare them. But Killer Clowns from Outer Space absolutely obliterates this episode, because even though that one's goofy and over the top, there's payoff. It's well done, and there's actual things that come out of that. Here in this episode, it's very much a lot of back and forth, running between the layer, running back home, you gotta believe me, and that kind of stuff. And then just, when the mass mutant's actually on screen, he's not that big of an intimidating threat. I like his look. I like the gimmick of the layer. I like the way Adam West as the Galloping Gazelle is, but the stuff they actually do is pretty weak. And as an adult, I rank this episode quite a bit lower. So I would give Attack of the Mutant a 5.5 out of 10. This is an okay, meh episode. For a two-parter, it's very disappointing. One of the weakest two-parters out there. Just really did not do its job. It didn't need to be a two-parter. It just felt very dragged on. It really led to nowhere. So those are my thoughts. Sorry if you love this episode. Again, that's 100% you're right. You can love it. I can see some reasons why people love it, but I think it's a little bit too cheesy, too corny. And not just that, but there's no payoff to the corny, cheesy, over-the-top stuff. And the characters are weak. The villains are weak. Pacing is weak. Structure is odd. Just a weak episode. All I have for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, hit hit the subscribe button down below and hit that like button. We are very close to 300 subscribers. If not, we've already surpassed it by the time I made this video. Hopefully, God bless. If you like this video, comment down below as well. What are your thoughts about Attack of the Mutant? Do you love this episode? Do you not like this episode? Do you hate it, in fact? And do you agree, disagree with me? And what are some of your favorite comic book / superhero horror stories or kids horror stories, whatever it could be? I don't care what genre. And that's all I have for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. And deuces. We need since Adam West is in this episode, we need the Batman transition, but my ass is too lazy to edit, so we'll just go.